It was supposed to be just another normal evening at the restaurant, nothing special, nothing different from any other day. The restaurant was one of the most expensive places in the city, known for its soft lighting, polished floors, and customers who wore designer clothes and spoke in low, confident voices. For most people, dining there was a luxury. For her, it was simply her workplace. She had been working as a waitress there for almost 2 years. She was young, hard-working, and used to standing on her feet for long hours with a polite smile on her face. Life had never been easy for her, but she had learned not to complain. Her mother had raised her alone, teaching her the value of honesty, patience, and dignity. Every shift, she reminded herself that this job was helping her pay bills and support her mom, and that was enough motivation to keep going. That evening was especially busy. The restaurant was full, and the sound of cutlery, soft music, and quiet conversations filled the air. She moved quickly from table to table, taking orders, serving food, and answering questions, all while trying to stay calm and professional. Her manager reminded everyone that an important guest would be arriving soon, someone very wealthy and influential. The staff was told to be extra careful and respectful. A few minutes later, the man arrived. He walked in calmly, wearing a perfectly tailored suit and a watch that probably cost more than her yearly salary. People noticed him immediately, not because he was loud, but because he carried himself with quiet confidence. The manager rushed to greet him personally and guided him to a private table near the window. Other customers whispered softly, some recognizing him from business news or magazines. He was a billionaire, someone who lived in a world completely different from hers. When the manager asked her to serve his table, she felt a small wave of nervousness. Important customers often meant higher expectations and less patience. Still, she took a deep breath, straightened her uniform, and walked toward the table with her usual professional smile. At first, everything felt normal. She greeted him politely and began explaining the menu. He listened attentively, nodding once or twice, his voice calm and polite when he spoke. He was not rude or demanding like some rich customers she had served before. In fact, he seemed distant, lost in his own thoughts, as if something heavy rested on his mind. As she stood there taking his order, her eyes briefly fell on his hand resting on the table. That was when something strange happened. On his wrist, just below his watch, she noticed a tattoo. It was small but very clear, a simple symbol she recognized instantly. Her heart skipped a beat. For a moment, she thought she was imagining things. She looked again, more carefully this time, and her breath caught in her chest. She knew that tattoo. She had seen it her entire life. Her mother had the exact same tattoo in the exact same place. Growing up, she had asked her mother many times about it. Her mother always smiled sadly and said it was a memory from her past, something she never wanted to forget. She never gave more details, no matter how much she asked. That tattoo had always been a mystery, something quiet and emotional that her mother carried with her. Standing there in front of this powerful stranger, seeing that same symbol on his wrist, she felt confused and shaken. Her mind raced with questions. How could this be possible? Was it just a coincidence? Tattoos were common, after all. But something about it felt too familiar, too exact. She tried to focus on her job, writing down his order, but her hands felt slightly unsteady. Her thoughts drifted to her mother, to late nights in their small apartment, to stories half told and questions never answered. The air around her felt heavier, as if the moment carried more meaning than she understood. For a few seconds, she debated with herself. She could ignore it, finish her job, and walk away. That would be the safest choice. Speaking up could be awkward, even unprofessional. This man was powerful, wealthy, and a stranger. What if she embarrassed herself? What if he reacted badly? But something deep inside her pushed her to speak. Her voice came out softly, almost carefully, as she pointed gently toward his wrist and said that simple sentence that would change everything. She mentioned the tattoo and said her mother had the same one. The moment the words left her mouth, she felt it. The air shifted. The billionaire's expression changed instantly. The calm look on his face disappeared, replaced by shock and disbelief. His eyes widened slightly, and his hand moved without thinking, pulling his wrist back as if to hide the tattoo. For the first time since he sat down, he looked truly unsettled. She realized then that this was no ordinary shift. Whatever she had just said had opened a door to something much bigger than either of them expected. The moment she spoke about the tattoo, she immediately wished she could take the words back. Silence fell between them, thick and uncomfortable. The billionaire did not respond right away. Instead, he stared at her as if she had said something impossible, something that should not exist in his world. His confident posture changed. His shoulders stiffened, and his fingers slowly tightened around the edge of the table. She noticed his hand move instinctively toward his wrist, trying to cover the tattoo with his sleeve. That small action told her more than words ever could. This was not a simple coincidence for him. Whatever that tattoo meant, it clearly held deep meaning. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, her voice slightly nervous, thinking she had crossed a line. "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable." But he did not wave her away like other rich customers often did. He did not laugh it off either. Instead, he looked up at her again, this time more carefully, as if he were seeing her for the first time. His eyes searched her face, studying her features, her expression, her skin tone, her posture. It made her uneasy, but she stood still, unsure of what to do. "Your mother," he said slowly, his voice lower than before, "where did she get that tattoo?" The question caught her off guard. She had expected anger or dismissal, not curiosity mixed with something that sounded like fear. She swallowed and answered honestly. She said her mother had it for as long as she could remember. It was something from her past, something she never talked much about. The billionaire leaned back slightly in his chair, exhaling as if the air had been trapped in his lungs for years. His gaze drifted toward the window, where city lights glowed against the dark sky. For a moment, it felt like he was somewhere else, far away from the restaurant, far away from the present. "That tattoo," he said quietly, almost to himself, "was meant to be unique." Her heart began to beat faster. She did not fully understand what he meant, but his tone made her feel that she had stepped into a story much older and heavier than her own life. She wondered if she should excuse herself and leave, but something told her to stay. He asked her more questions, gently this time. Where was she from? Who raised her? What did her mother do for a living? Each question felt simple on the surface, yet his reaction to her answers made them feel important. When she mentioned that her mother had raised her alone, his face tightened again, and his jaw clenched slightly. He paused for a long moment before speaking again. "There was a woman," he said slowly, choosing his words with care, "a long time ago. We made promises to each other. That tattoo was one of them." Her breath caught. She felt a strange mix of confusion and curiosity. She had heard her mother speak in that same careful way before, when talking about things that still hurt. The idea that this powerful man and her quiet, hard-working mother could share something like that felt unreal. She asked him what the tattoo meant, unsure if she was allowed to ask but unable to stop herself. He hesitated, then answered. He said it was a symbol of love, loyalty, and a future they planned together. A future that never happened. As he spoke, the confident billionaire image faded, replaced by a man burdened by regret. He admitted that he had left suddenly, chasing opportunity and success, believing he would return. But life moved on, and by the time he tried to find her, she was gone. No address, no phone number, no trace. The waitress felt her chest tighten. Pieces of her own life began to line up in her mind. Her mother's silence. The unanswered questions. The sadness that sometimes appeared in her eyes for no clear reason. Still, she tried to stay grounded. This was a stranger. Wealthy, powerful, but still a stranger. She reminded herself not to jump to conclusions. Coincidences happened. Life was strange like that. But when he finally asked her name, his voice trembled just slightly. And when he repeated it softly, as if tasting the sound, she saw something change in him. Not certainty, but hope mixed with fear. The kind of hope people carry when they are afraid of being wrong but even more afraid of being right. Around them, the restaurant continued as normal. Plates clinked, people laughed quietly, servers walked by with trays of food. But at that table, time felt frozen. She realized then that this conversation was no longer about a tattoo. It was about a past that refused to stay buried, and a truth that was slowly beginning to surface, whether either of them was ready for it or not. The change in him was sudden and impossible to miss. Just moments ago, he had been calm, controlled, and distant, like a man who had mastered every room he entered. Now, after hearing her words, it was as if a crack had formed in that perfect surface. His eyes no longer looked relaxed. They looked shaken, almost troubled. He slowly placed his glass back on the table, though he had not taken a single sip. His fingers lingered there, stiff, as if his body needed something solid to hold on to. The waitress noticed his breathing had changed. It was deeper now, uneven, like someone trying to steady themselves after bad news. He looked up at her again, but this time there was no power in his gaze, only confusion and disbelief. "That's not possible," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. "That tattoo, there shouldn't be another one." She felt a knot form in her stomach. She had expected curiosity, maybe surprise, but not this kind of reaction. It was the reaction of someone whose past had just walked back into the room without warning. She considered apologizing again, stepping away, pretending none of this had happened. But he spoke before she could move. "How old is your mother?" he asked. The question was sharp and unexpected. She hesitated, unsure why it mattered, but answered honestly. As soon as she did, his face lost what little color it had left. His lips parted slightly, then pressed together as if he were holding back a flood of thoughts. He stood up suddenly, the chair scraping softly against the floor. Nearby diners glanced over, curious, but he did not seem to notice them. He paced one step, then stopped, running a hand through his hair. For the first time, she saw panic in him, raw and unfiltered. "That can't be a coincidence," he muttered. She felt exposed standing there while he unraveled in front of her. This was not how powerful men were supposed to act. This was not how billionaires behaved. This was how people reacted when something they had buried deep came clawing back to the surface. He turned to face her again, his voice lower now, almost fragile. He asked her where her mother grew up, what kind of work she did, what her personality was like. Each question felt heavier than the last. As she answered, she saw his expression shift again and again, shock giving way to recognition. When she described her mother as strong but quiet, independent but deeply emotional, he closed his eyes for a brief moment, as if the image was painfully clear in his mind. When she mentioned that her mother never spoke about her past relationships, his shoulders sagged slightly. It was as if every answer confirmed something he had spent years trying to deny. He finally sat back down, but the man who returned to the chair was not the same one who had first entered the restaurant. His posture was slumped, his confidence stripped away. He stared at the tattoo on his own wrist, pulling his sleeve back deliberately this time, studying it like it belonged to someone else. "I got this when I was young," he said slowly. "Before the money. Before the headlines. Before I became someone people recognize." He explained that the tattoo was part of a promise he made to a woman he loved deeply. They believed in forever. They believed nothing could separate them. But life had other plans. He left to chase success, convinced he would come back for her once he had something to offer. When he returned, she was gone. No note. No goodbye. Just absence. The waitress listened silently, her heart pounding. She had heard fragments of this story before, though never like this. Her mother's quiet sadness. Her refusal to speak about the man who left. The way she always said, some people don't come back, even if they promise. Suddenly, the past felt dangerously close. The billionaire looked at her again, and his eyes were wet now, though no tears had fallen. If what you're saying is true, he said carefully, then I may have missed an entire lifetime. Those words hit her harder than anything else he had said. She realized this was no longer just about him. This was about her. About her mother. About years of questions she never thought would have answers. But fear crept in alongside curiosity. What if this was wrong? What if this man was mistaken? What if opening this door only led to pain? She straightened slightly, reminding herself who she was. She was not a lost child searching for rescue. She was a woman who had built her life with honesty and hard work. Still, she could not deny the pull of the moment. Around them, the restaurant buzzed with life, unaware that two strangers were standing at the edge of a truth powerful enough to change everything. The billionaire finally spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "We need to talk," he said. "Not here. Not like this." And in that moment, both of them knew that whatever came next, there was no turning back. The conversation slowed, but the weight of it grew heavier with every passing second. The billionaire leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling as if answers might be written there. His voice, when he spoke again, sounded different, rougher, like it was carrying years of pain he had never allowed himself to feel. He began talking about his past, not as a powerful businessman, but as a young man who once had dreams that had nothing to do with money. He said there was a time when he believed love was enough, when he believed promises meant everything. He spoke about a woman who had changed his life long before the world knew his name. A woman who believed in him when he had nothing. As he described her, the waitress felt her chest tighten. Every word sounded familiar. The way he said she was strong but gentle. How she laughed quietly but loved deeply. How she believed in loyalty more than anything else. These were the same words she would have used to describe her own mother. He admitted that his hunger for success had slowly taken over his life. Opportunities came fast, and he chased them without looking back. He told himself he was doing it for their future, that once he was successful, everything would be perfect. But time passed quickly. Calls were missed. Letters were never sent. And one day, when he finally returned, she was gone. He searched for her for years, he said. Asked questions. Hired people. But it was as if she had vanished from the world. Eventually, success demanded his full attention, and the pain of losing her was buried under meetings, money, and power. The tattoo remained the only thing he kept from that life, a reminder of who he once was. The waitress listened quietly, her thoughts racing. She remembered nights when her mother sat by the window, staring outside for no clear reason. She remembered how her mother worked 2 jobs but never complained. How she never spoke badly about the man who left, only saying that life does not always go the way people plan. When the billionaire finished speaking, silence filled the space between them. He looked tired now, older than his age. His wealth could not hide the regret written across his face. He looked at the waitress again, and this time his eyes were filled with guilt. "If she had a child," he said slowly, "then I failed in the worst way possible." Those words shook her. She had grown up without a father, learning to be strong without expecting anything from anyone. She had learned not to dream about what could have been. But hearing this man speak of regret made her feel something she did not expect. Not anger. Not joy. But sadness. She told him about her childhood. About growing up watching her mother struggle but never break. About how her mother taught her self-respect and independence. About how they built a life without waiting for anyone to save them. As she spoke, he listened closely, hanging on to every word as if they mattered more than any business deal he had ever made. He apologized, though he did not know yet if he truly had the right to. He apologized for leaving, for not searching harder, for choosing ambition over love. His apology was not loud or dramatic. It was quiet and heavy, the kind that comes too late but is still real. The waitress did not know how to respond. Part of her wanted to protect her mother, to shield her from old wounds reopening. Another part of her felt a strange sense of clarity, as if pieces of her life were finally starting to make sense. She realized this moment was not about forgiveness yet. It was about truth. He asked if he could meet her mother. Not as a billionaire. Not as a man with power. But as someone who needed to face his past. The request made her nervous. Old pain does not disappear just because the truth is revealed. Sometimes, it hurts even more. She told him she would not promise anything. Her mother deserved the choice. He nodded, accepting that answer with respect. It was clear he understood that money could not fix this. As she stepped away from the table to return to her work, her hands trembled slightly. She felt like she was carrying a secret too big for her to hold alone. The restaurant lights seemed brighter, the sounds louder, but everything felt distant. That night, both of them sat alone with their thoughts. He faced the reality that success had cost him more than he ever realized. She faced the possibility that her life story was about to change. The past had finally caught up with them, and neither of them knew what the future would demand in return. The idea refused to leave either of their minds. What began as a strange coincidence now felt like a truth pressing harder with every passing minute. After the waitress stepped away, the billionaire sat alone at the table, barely touching his food. The sounds of the restaurant faded around him as his thoughts returned again and again to the same question he was afraid to ask out loud. What if this was real? Across the room, she tried to focus on her work, but her body moved on habit. Her mind was somewhere else entirely. Every memory of her childhood replayed in fragments. Her mother working late nights. The empty space in family photos. The questions she stopped asking because there were never answers. She had learned to accept life as it was, but now acceptance felt impossible. When her shift slowed, she found herself glancing toward his table. He was still there, staring at the tattoo on his wrist as if it held all the answers. When their eyes met briefly, neither of them looked away. There was no certainty between them, only the same unspoken thought. This could not be ignored. He asked for her attention again, not with authority, but with quiet hesitation. His voice had lost its sharpness, replaced by something almost fragile. He said he needed to be sure. He explained that he had spent his life relying on facts, contracts, and proof. Hope without truth had already hurt him once. She understood. If this was going to open old wounds, it needed to be done carefully. Guessing was not enough. Emotion alone could not carry something this heavy. They spoke about details, small things that could not be easily invented. A scar her mother had on her hand. A habit of humming when nervous. A necklace she never took off. With each detail, his face tightened, and his eyes filled with recognition. These were not stories he had shared with anyone. They were memories buried deep. Still, memory was not proof. He suggested something that made her heart race. A DNA test. Not as a demand, but as a way to protect everyone involved. The word itself felt powerful. Final. She had seen it in movies, but never imagined it would enter her life. She did not agree right away. This decision did not belong to her alone. Her mother had lived with dignity and strength for years. Dragging her into something uncertain felt wrong. She told him she would need time, and more importantly, her mother's consent. He respected that. There was no pressure, no offer of money, no promises. That alone surprised her. She had expected control, maybe manipulation. Instead, she saw restraint. That night, she went home carrying a weight she had never felt before. Her mother noticed immediately. She always did. The way she asked what was wrong was gentle, careful, like she was afraid of the answer. The waitress told her everything. At first, her mother said nothing. She sat still, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her face showed no shock, only exhaustion. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady but filled with emotion. She said she had known this moment might come one day. She had just never expected it to arrive like this. Her mother admitted the truth she had carried silently for decades. The man with the tattoo had been someone she loved deeply. When he left, she waited. When he did not return, she chose to move forward alone. Not out of anger, but out of survival. She never reached out because she did not want pity or rescue. She wanted peace. The idea of reopening that chapter frightened her. But the idea of living with unanswered questions frightened her more. They agreed to the test. Days passed slowly. Every phone notification made her heart jump. When the call finally came, it felt unreal. The results were clear. There was no doubt left. The billionaire was her father. The truth hit hard and quietly. There were no dramatic tears, no shouting. Just silence, followed by deep emotion. Years of absence suddenly had a name and a face. For him, the confirmation was both devastating and relieving. He had found what he lost, but too late to reclaim the time that mattered most. For her, it was a strange mix of clarity and loss. She finally knew where she came from, but it did not erase the years of growing up without him. What was undeniable was this. The truth was too big to ignore, and pretending nothing had changed was no longer an option. Life had reached a turning point, and none of them would walk away the same again. The confirmation changed everything, but not in the way movies often show. There was no sudden happiness, no instant bond, no feeling that all the pain of the past had disappeared. Instead, there was a quiet shock that settled deep inside both of them, heavy and undeniable. For the billionaire, the truth felt like standing at the edge of a life he never knew he had. He had built companies, made impossible deals, and controlled rooms full of powerful people, yet nothing had prepared him for this. Knowing he had a daughter all along made every achievement feel smaller. Success suddenly seemed loud and empty compared to the years he had missed. He asked to meet her properly, not in the restaurant, not as a customer and a waitress, but as two people connected by something far greater than chance. They met in a quiet cafe days later, far from luxury and attention. He arrived early, nervous in a way he had not felt since he was young. When she walked in, he stood up without thinking, unsure whether to smile, speak, or stay silent. They sat across from each other, studying every detail. The way she held her cup reminded him of her mother. The way she listened before speaking felt familiar. He wanted to say 1,000 things, to explain, to apologize, to go back in time. But no words felt big enough. "I don't expect anything from you," she said first, breaking the silence. Her voice was calm, but firm. "I didn't grow up dreaming about finding you." Her honesty surprised him, but he respected it. He told her he was not there to buy forgiveness or force a relationship. He said he only wanted a chance to know her, even if that chance was small. They talked about her life. Her studies. Her work. Her dreams. He listened closely, asking questions not because he felt entitled, but because he was genuinely interested. For the first time in his life, he felt like a student again, learning something that truly mattered. Then came the hardest part. Talking about the past. He admitted his failures openly. He admitted he chose ambition over love. He admitted he believed he had time, and that belief cost him everything. He did not excuse himself. He did not blame circumstances. He took responsibility in a way she had never seen from powerful men. Still, forgiveness did not come easily. She told him about the nights her mother cried quietly when she thought no one could hear. About birthdays where one chair was always empty. About learning strength too early. Her words were not angry, but they were honest, and honesty can hurt more than anger. He listened without interrupting, tears filling his eyes but never falling. He knew this pain was his to carry. As days turned into weeks, they met more often. Slowly. Carefully. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they sat in silence. There were moments of awkwardness, moments of warmth, and moments where the weight of the past felt unbearable. He wanted to help her financially, to offer comfort through security. She refused at first. She did not want money to become the language of their connection. Eventually, they reached a balance. Support without control. Care without pressure. Meeting her mother was the most emotional moment of all. When he stood in front of the woman he once loved, time seemed to collapse. There was pain in her eyes, but also strength. She did not shout. She did not cry. She spoke calmly, telling him exactly how his absence shaped her life. He apologized again, not expecting forgiveness, only understanding. She did not forgive him right away. But she allowed him to be present. That alone felt like a miracle. For the waitress, now no longer just a waitress in her own story, identity became something new. She was still herself. Still independent. Still strong. But now she understood her roots. She understood the silence, the strength, and the sacrifices. For the billionaire, life changed forever. Wealth no longer defined success. Presence did. The truth had been spoken, but truth alone does not heal wounds. As days passed, the reality of what had been uncovered began to settle in ways none of them expected. There was no clear path forward, no guide on how to rebuild something that had never existed in the first place. The past was no longer hidden, and that made everything feel heavier. For the billionaire, guilt became a constant companion. Every quiet moment reminded him of birthdays he missed, school events he never attended, and struggles he never witnessed. He began to see his life differently. The awards on his walls and the numbers in his accounts felt meaningless compared to the empty years between him and his daughter. For the first time, he questioned the choices he once defended so proudly. He tried to be present, but presence was unfamiliar to him. He was used to leading, deciding, controlling outcomes. This was different. He had to learn patience. He had to accept boundaries. Some days, his daughter was open and willing to talk. Other days, she pulled away, needing space to process emotions she had buried for years. He learned to respect that silence instead of fighting it. For her, the emotional weight came in waves. Some mornings, she felt hopeful. Other days, anger crept in without warning. She questioned everything. If he had truly cared, why did he not search harder? Why did success matter more than love? These questions had no easy answers, and she struggled not to let them harden her heart. Her mother watched quietly, offering guidance without pressure. She reminded her daughter that healing does not mean forgetting, and forgiveness does not mean excusing pain. It means choosing peace over carrying anger forever. Still, she allowed her daughter to move at her own pace. The billionaire faced consequences beyond emotion. Public attention became a concern. A man of his status could not simply change his life without questions. Rumors began to circulate as he adjusted his schedule, canceled meetings, and prioritized personal time. For the first time, he chose to protect something private instead of managing an image. He began attending therapy, something he once dismissed as unnecessary. Sitting in a room where money held no power forced him to confront himself honestly. He admitted his fear of being unworthy of a second chance. He admitted that success had been his shield against pain, and without it, he felt exposed. Meanwhile, she struggled with her identity. People began treating her differently once they learned pieces of the truth. Some were curious. Some were jealous. Some assumed her life would suddenly become easy. They did not understand that knowing where you come from does not erase the work of becoming who you are. She continued working, continued studying, continued living on her own terms. She refused to let her story turn into gossip or spectacle. She was not a secret, but she was not a headline either. The relationship between them moved slowly, marked by difficult conversations and quiet understanding. He learned that being a father was not about making up for the past with grand gestures. It was about showing up consistently, even when it was uncomfortable. One evening, after a long day, she asked him a simple question. If you could go back, would you choose differently? He did not answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady but filled with regret. He said he would choose love sooner. He would not confuse ambition with purpose again. That answer did not fix everything, but it mattered. For her mother, seeing him take responsibility softened something inside her. Not enough to erase pain, but enough to allow peace. She reminded him that the past cannot be rewritten, but the future is always waiting to be shaped. Part 7 was not about resolution. It was about accountability, growth, and the slow, uncomfortable work of becoming better than who they once were. The hardest part was accepting that healing is not dramatic. It is quiet, messy, and deeply personal. And it takes time. The truth had been spoken, but truth alone does not heal wounds. As the days passed, the reality of what had been uncovered began to settle in ways none of them expected. There was no clear path forward, no guide on how to rebuild something that had never existed in the first place. The past was no longer hidden, and that made everything feel heavier. For the billionaire, guilt became a constant companion. Every quiet moment reminded him of birthdays he missed, school events he never attended, and struggles he never witnessed. He began to see his life differently. The awards on his walls and the numbers in his accounts felt meaningless compared to the empty years between him and his daughter. For the first time, he questioned the choices he once defended so proudly. He tried to be present, but presence was unfamiliar to him. He was used to leading, deciding, controlling outcomes. This was different. He had to learn patience. He had to accept boundaries. Some days, his daughter was open and willing to talk. Other days, she pulled away, needing space to process emotions she had buried for years. He learned to respect that silence instead of fighting it. For her, the emotional weight came in waves. Some mornings, she felt hopeful. Other days, anger crept in without warning. She questioned everything. If he had truly cared, why did he not search harder? Why did success matter more than love? These questions had no easy answers, and she struggled not to let them harden her heart. Her mother watched quietly, offering guidance without pressure. She reminded her daughter that healing does not mean forgetting, and forgiveness does not mean excusing pain. It means choosing peace over carrying anger forever. Still, she allowed her daughter to move at her own pace. The billionaire faced consequences beyond emotion. Public attention became a concern. A man of his status could not simply change his life without questions. Rumors began to circulate as he adjusted his schedule, canceled meetings, and prioritized personal time. For the first time, he chose to protect something private instead of managing an image. He began attending therapy, something he once dismissed as unnecessary. Sitting in a room where money held no power forced him to confront himself honestly. He admitted his fear of being unworthy of a second chance. He admitted that success had been his shield against pain, and without it, he felt exposed. Meanwhile, she struggled with her identity. People began treating her differently once they learned pieces of the truth. Some were curious. Some were jealous. Some assumed her life would suddenly become easy. They did not understand that knowing where you come from does not erase the work of becoming who you are. She continued working, continued studying, continued living on her own terms. She refused to let her story turn into gossip or spectacle. She was not a secret, but she was not a headline either. The relationship between them moved slowly, marked by difficult conversations and quiet understanding. He learned that being a father was not about making up for the past with grand gestures. It was about showing up consistently, even when it was uncomfortable. One evening, after a long day, she asked him a simple question. If you could go back, would you choose differently? He did not answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady but filled with regret. He said he would choose love sooner. He would not confuse ambition with purpose again. That answer did not fix everything, but it mattered. Time moved forward, slowly but surely. Not in dramatic leaps, but in small, meaningful moments that quietly reshaped their lives. There was no single day when everything suddenly felt right. Instead, there were many ordinary days that slowly became easier to breathe through. For the daughter, life began to settle into a new rhythm. She was still the same person who worked hard and valued independence. But now she carried a deeper sense of understanding about herself. Knowing where she came from did not change her past. But it gave her peace about questions that once kept her awake at night. She stopped wondering what was missing. And started focusing on what she had built on her own. Her strength no longer came from survival alone. It came from choice. The choice to move forward without bitterness. For the billionaire, the change was even more visible. He stepped away from the constant noise of power and competition. Meetings mattered less. Titles mattered less. What mattered was time. Time spent listening. Time spent showing up without an agenda. He learned to be present in quiet ways. Short phone calls just to check in. Simple meals shared without discussing business. Moments where nothing important happened. Yet everything felt important. He did not try to replace the years he lost. He understood that was impossible. Instead, he focused on not losing another day. He learned that love was not proven through wealth, but through consistency. The mother watched this transformation with cautious acceptance. She had lived too long protecting her heart to open it easily. But seeing effort without expectation softened her resistance. She saw a man who no longer ran from responsibility. A man willing to sit with discomfort instead of escaping it. She never asked for anything from him. And he never tried to buy forgiveness. Respect grew quietly between them. Not as lovers returning to the past, but as two people choosing peace in the present. There came a day when all three of them sat together. Not to discuss the past, but to talk about ordinary things. Work. Plans. Simple memories. And in that moment, something shifted. It felt normal. Not perfect. But real. The daughter realized then that family does not always arrive the way stories promise. Sometimes it arrives late. Sometimes broken. Sometimes unsure. But still capable of growth. She no longer felt defined by what she lacked. She felt defined by what she chose to become. And that choice felt powerful. The billionaire often thought back to the night in the restaurant. The moment everything changed because of one sentence spoken without intention. He understood now that life does not warn you before it transforms you. It simply does. He kept the tattoo uncovered now. No longer a secret. No longer a wound. But a reminder. Of love. Of loss. And of second chances. Their story did not end with perfection. There were still difficult days. Still awkward moments. Still emotions that surfaced unexpectedly. But there was honesty. And there was effort. And sometimes, that is enough. What began as an ordinary shift became a turning point none of them could have imagined. A reminder that the smallest moments can carry the greatest truths. That identity is not found in wealth or absence, but in connection and courage. In the end, it was not about a billionaire or a waitress. It was about three lives choosing to move forward without pretending the past never existed. Choosing growth over regret. And choosing love in its quietest, most honest form. Life did not pause after acceptance. It continued, demanding choices, courage, and clarity. Part 9 was where reflection turned into direction. Where healing slowly became purpose. The daughter began to see her story differently. Not as something that happened to her, but as something she could shape. She realized her life was no longer just about understanding the past. It was about deciding what kind of future she wanted. She returned to the restaurant one evening, not to work, but to sit quietly and observe. The place where everything began now felt symbolic. She watched people laugh, argue, celebrate, and move on. And she understood that life never waits for perfect timing. She decided to pursue her long-held dream of further education. A dream she once believed was unrealistic. Not because of money, but because of fear. Fear of stepping into something bigger than survival. This time, the fear felt different. It felt manageable. Not because someone could support her financially, but because she finally believed she deserved more. The billionaire supported her decision quietly. No public announcements. No control. Just encouragement. He learned that real support means standing beside someone, not in front of them. He also began redefining his own legacy. Not through donations or buildings with his name on them, but through presence and intention. He invested time into causes that reflected responsibility rather than image. Education. Community programs. Second chances for people who had been overlooked. For the first time, his work felt personal. Not driven by ego, but by understanding. The mother found her own sense of closure. Not by reopening old wounds, but by releasing the weight she carried for years. She allowed herself to acknowledge the pain without living inside it. She allowed herself to rest. One evening, she spoke words she had never said out loud. She said she no longer felt invisible. And that alone felt like freedom. As months passed, their bond strengthened in unexpected ways. They celebrated small wins, shared quiet disappointments, and learned each other's rhythms. There were still misunderstandings, still moments of distance. But there was trust growing where silence once lived. The daughter began to understand that identity is not inherited. It is earned. And knowing her father did not define her worth. It only added context. She was no longer searching for something missing. She was building something meaningful. The billionaire accepted that redemption is not instant. It is practiced daily. Through consistency. Through humility. Through listening more than speaking. He learned that being needed is not the same as being wanted. And being wanted must be earned. Part 9 was not about endings. It was about alignment. About lives finally moving in the same direction without forcing each other. The story that once shocked strangers had become deeply personal. Not something to explain, but something to live. And perhaps that was the greatest transformation of all. Not the reunion. Not the revelation. But the quiet decision to move forward with intention. Together, yet independent. Because real life does not end with answers. It continues with choices. And they were finally ready to choose wisely. The future arrived quietly, without announcement. Not as a grand reward for everything they had endured, but as an open space waiting to be filled with intention. Part 10 was where their story stopped being about discovery and started being about responsibility. About what comes next after truth has been accepted and emotions have settled. The daughter stood at a crossroads she never imagined reaching. For the first time, her choices were not shaped by absence. They were shaped by possibility. She understood now that knowing the truth did not give her answers to everything. But it gave her confidence in herself. She chose a path that felt right, not impressive. A path built on purpose rather than expectation. She focused on growth, on learning, on becoming someone she respected. Not because of who her father was, but because of who she had always been. She no longer felt the need to explain her story to others. The shock, the coincidence, the reveal. Those details belonged to the past. What mattered was how she lived moving forward. The billionaire watched this transformation with quiet pride. Not the pride of ownership, but the pride of witnessing strength. He learned that love does not require recognition. It requires consistency. He remained present without intruding, supportive without directing. He learned when to speak and when to simply listen. This balance was harder than any negotiation he had ever faced, but also more rewarding. He began reshaping his life in subtle ways. Simplifying schedules. Choosing depth over speed. He realized that the measure of success had changed. It was no longer about how much he controlled, but how much he protected. The mother, observing from a distance that felt safe, finally allowed herself to breathe fully. She no longer carried the weight of secrecy, nor the burden of resentment. She did not seek closure through apology. She found it through peace. She watched her daughter step forward without fear. And in that moment, she knew her sacrifices had meaning. Her silence had protected something precious. Strength. There came a moment when all three understood something important. Their story did not need to continue being told. It needed to be lived. They stopped revisiting the past. Not because it did not matter, but because it no longer controlled them. The tattoo, once a symbol of loss, became a reminder of resilience. Life continued to offer challenges, misunderstandings, disappointments, moments of doubt. But they faced them honestly. The daughter learned that forgiveness is not a gift you give once. It is a decision you make repeatedly. Some days it was easy. Some days it was not. But each time, it freed her a little more. The billionaire accepted that being part of someone's life is a privilege, not a right. And privileges must be earned daily. He stopped trying to prove himself, and started showing himself. Part 10 was not a conclusion. It was a foundation. The moment where everything that followed would stand. What began with a sentence spoken without thought had grown into a future shaped by care, by humility, by choice. And perhaps that was the real ending. Not a dramatic farewell. Not a perfect resolution. But a quiet understanding that life does not owe us anything. Yet sometimes, if we are honest enough to face the truth, and brave enough to change, it gives us exactly what we need.